This is a story from my own life, something that happened a few years back. It's not easy to talk about, but sometimes you have to tell the truth, no matter how much it costs. The weight of the polished oak podium felt cool and solid under my trembling fingers. I stared out at the sea of graduates in their black caps and gowns, a beautiful, anonymous ocean of hope, but my eyes were fixed on just one, my son, Liam, his smile a beacon in the third row. Then my gaze drifted against my will to the man sitting beside him, my ex-husband Richard, who caught my eye and gave me a thin, knowing smirk. That's when he stood up, right in the middle of the University of Texas commencement ceremony, and the microphone amplified my sharp intake of breath as his voice boomed across the stadium lawn. Before my ex-wife, Sarah, gives her sanitized version of parenthood, perhaps she should tell you the real cost of success. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The road to that podium was paved with 22 years of sacrifice, a journey that began not with heartbreak, but with a love I believed was unshakable. For 15 years, Richard Vance was the sun my world orbited around. We met in Austin, two ambitious young professionals trying to make a mark. I was a junior editor at a small publishing house, and he was a rising star in software sales, all dazzling smiles and relentless optimism. He could sell anything, but the thing he sold best was himself. He sold me a vision of a future together, a partnership, a life built on mutual trust and ambition. And for a long time, that was exactly what it felt like. Our home in Zilker was filled with laughter, the smell of my baking, and the sound of Richard on the phone, closing another impossible deal. When Liam was born, my universe contracted to the size of his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. Richard seemed to feel it too. He was the doting father, the man who would come home from a grueling business trip and spend an hour on the floor making spaceship noises with a giggling toddler. My parents, John and Mary, adored him. They were the salt of the earth, high school teachers from a small town in East Texas who valued honesty and hard work above all else. They saw in Richard the success they'd never chased for themselves, but they also saw the way he looked at me, and they believed in it. They had scrimped and saved their entire lives, investing their modest salaries with a quiet, steady discipline. Their dream wasn't a lavish retirement, it was a legacy for their only grandchild. When they passed away within a year of each other, the grief was a physical weight, but the inheritance they left behind, a carefully managed portfolio worth just over $200,000, was a tangible piece of their love. It was a sacred trust, a final gift intended to secure Liam's future. In my mind, that money was already in a vault, labeled, "Liam, do not touch." Richard saw it differently. He saw it as fuel. By then, his ambition had outgrown his role as a salesman. He wanted to be the visionary, the founder, the next Austin tech mogul. He'd been developing an idea for years, a logistics management app he called Nexus Flow. To me, it was a cloud of incomprehensible jargon, synergy, disruption, scalability. But to him, it was the future. One evening, he spread architectural blueprints for his phantom company across our dining room table, his eyes alight with the feverish energy I hadn't seen in years. "Sarah, honey, this is it," he said, his voice a low, urgent hum. "This is our shot, not just for us, but for Liam. College tuition is a nightmare. This isn't just an investment, it's an inoculation against a lifetime of debt for him." He pointed to a wildly optimistic financial projection. "We put your parents' money in now as seed capital. We're the first ones in. When the venture capital guys come knocking, and they will, Sarah, believe me, our initial stake will be worth 5, maybe 10 times as much. We won't just be paying for Liam's bachelor's, we'll be buying his first house, setting him up for life. It's a sure thing." I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. It felt wrong, like spending hallowed ground. "Richard, I don't know. My parents? They were so cautious. They never took risks. This money is for Liam. It's supposed to be safe. He came around the table and wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. His charm was a physical force, a warmth that could melt any resistance. Safe is for sheep, Sarah. We're lions. This money sitting in some low-yield bond is sleeping. I can make it roar. He kissed my neck, a familiar gesture that had always made me feel cherished. Trust me. And in that moment, I betrayed my parents' legacy. I chose to trust my husband. It felt like a testament to our partnership, a leap of faith. He set up a new joint business account, and I authorized the transfer from my inheritance account, the full $200,000. I remember seeing the balance drain to zero and feeling a pang of genuine fear, a feeling I quickly suppressed. Richard was ecstatic, celebrating with a bottle of champagne we couldn't really afford. A few days later, a sliver of my father's practicality cut through my love-induced haze. "We should have something in writing, Richard," I said, as casually as I could. "Just for the sake of it, a formal loan agreement." He threw his head back and laughed, a big, booming sound that filled the kitchen. "A loan agreement? Honey, we're husband and wife, not a bank and a borrower. It's our money, our venture." But I insisted, feeling foolish but firm. "It's my parents' money, Richard, and it's for our son. Please." Seeing my expression, he relented with a sigh and a patronizing smile. All right, if it makes you feel better." He dismissed the idea of lawyers as an unnecessary expense, so I typed up a simple promissory note on our home computer. It stated the amount, the purpose of the funds as a loan for the business, and a clear promise of repayment within 5 years. He signed it with a grand, looping signature, a theatrical flourish, as if he were signing the Declaration of Independence. "There," he said, tossing the pen down. "Happy now with your cute little security blanket?" I folded the paper, my hands trembling slightly, and filed it away in our home office, trying to ignore the feeling that I had just documented the biggest mistake of my life. The first year of Nexus Flow was a whirlwind of manufactured hype. Richard was in his element, a maestro of buzz. He rented a slick office space on Congress Avenue he called the Incubator, hosted catered launch parties with artisanal cocktails, and flew to tech conferences in San Francisco. He was on magazine covers, local ones, but still. He looked the part of the visionary CEO. Our lives, however, grew strangely disconnected. He was out late most nights for investor meetings at the Driscoll Hotel or strategy dinners at Perla's. When I tried to ask about the company's finances, to see the books he was so proud of, he would deflect with a charming wave of his hand. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about the numbers, honey. That's my department. You just keep being the amazing mom and wife you are." It was a gilded cage, his condescension wrapped in the language of love and protection. He made me feel that my questions were an intrusion, a lack of faith. Then the whispers started. A friend from my book club mentioned seeing Richard having a very intimate lunch at Josephine House with a stunningly beautiful younger woman. "They looked so cozy," she'd remarked, oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped. When I asked Richard about it, he didn't even blink. "Oh, that was probably Tiffany. She's my new marketing consultant, a real shark, brilliant girl." The explanation was so smooth, so effortless, that I felt ashamed for even asking. But the late nights continued, and the scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume, something musky and floral, so unlike my own, clung to his suits. I started noticing other things, credit card statements I didn't recognize, with charges for jewelry stores and weekend getaways to places he'd told me he was visiting for business, alone. The business account, which I still had access to, showed huge withdrawals for consulting fees paid to a Tiffany Maxwell. The collapse, when it came, was terrifyingly swift. Nexus Flow, it turned out, was a beautifully packaged shell. The app was buggy, The concept was flawed, and a major client they had been banking on discovered the ruse and pulled out, threatening a lawsuit. The venture capitalist Richard had been courting vanished like smoke. Within a month, the company was insolvent. The $200,000 was gone. Every last cent. When I confronted him in the middle of our living room, holding the damning bank statements, the charming salesman finally disappeared. In his place stood a cold, cruel stranger. "It was a business investment, Sarah," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion as he started packing a suitcase. "Investments fail. That's the risk you take. Don't try to pin this on me." "Risk? You told me it was a sure thing. You promised to pay it back." I was screaming now, the promissory note shaking in my hand. "This is Liam's future." He stopped packing and turned to me, and he laughed, a real hearty laugh that chilled me to the bone. "Oh, come on. You can't be serious with that little piece of paper. Any lawyer will tell you that's a domestic understanding, not a contract. We were married. It was our money." Our money, the phrase was a dagger. It wasn't my parents' legacy. It wasn't Liam's future. It was ours. And now it was his loss to walk away from, and mine to bear alone. He walked out that night and drove straight to Tiffany's downtown condo. The divorce was not a separation. It was a public flaying. Richard hired Marcus Black, a notoriously ruthless attorney whose specialty was making wealthy men look like victims. In court, Marcus painted me as a bitter, unstable, and controlling woman who had never supported her husband's ambitions. He twisted my frantic concern over the lost inheritance into a narrative of greed. He argued I was trying to punish Richard for a failed business venture we had both agreed to. When my lawyer presented the promissory note, Marcus scoffed. "Your Honor, this is a document typed up at home between a husband and wife. It represents, at best, a hopeful intention, not a legally binding debt. It was a spousal gift to a joint venture." Richard on the stand was a masterpiece of calculated sorrow. He spoke of his shattered dreams for Nexus Flow, how he'd only ever wanted to provide for his family, and how my lack of faith had been a constant source of pain. He even shed a tear. The judge, an older man who seemed to see a reflection of his own ambitious youth in Richard, was completely swayed. He declared the promissory note inadmissible as a formal debt and divided our remaining assets, which were meager, down the middle. Richard was legally and financially free. He married Tiffany 2 months later in a lavish ceremony in Napa Valley. The photos, which a friend made sure I saw, were a study in triumphant cruelty. Richard and his bride, framed by vineyards, toasting their new life with champagne, a life purchased with my son's inheritance. The humiliation was so profound, it was almost paralyzing. I was forced to sell our beautiful family home in Zilker, the only home Liam had ever known. I found a small 2-bedroom condo to rent in a less fashionable part of Austin and took on extra freelance editing work, often staying up until 3 a.m. to make ends meet. I started rebuilding Liam's college fund from scratch, one $50 contribution at a time. Through it all, I never spoke a word of the truth to Liam. I couldn't bear to poison his relationship with his father. I let Richard be the fun dad, the one who flew Liam to Aspen for ski trips and bought him a car for his 16th birthday, all while I was secretly deciding between paying the electricity bill and buying new tires for my decade-old Honda. I allowed him to build a kingdom of lies on the ashes of my life. So when Liam received his acceptance letter from the University of Texas at Austin, his first-choice school, the pride I felt was a fierce, protective, almost primal force. It was my victory. Every tuition payment I made felt like a battle I had won, and when, to my utter shock, I was nominated and selected by a parent committee to be one of the speakers at his commencement ceremony, it felt like some sort of cosmic validation, a chance to finally have my voice heard. I was terrified, but Liam was ecstatic. "You have to do it, Mom," he'd urged, his eyes shining. "You're the one who got me here." For weeks I labored over that speech. It was a tribute to resilience, to the quiet, unseen sacrifices of parenthood, to the strength it takes to keep going when the world has knocked you down. I never mentioned Richard by name. I didn't think I had to. The truth of my struggle was woven into every carefully chosen word. I just never imagined he would have the unmitigated audacity to stand up and try to rip that truth away from me in front of thousands of people on the proudest day of my life. His voice, echoing across that sun-drenched lawn, wasn't just an interruption, it was a declaration of war. He thought he had all the power, that he could humiliate me into silence one last time. He had no idea that in that moment he was handing me the weapon I never knew I needed. He thought the fight was over, but it was just getting started. The immediate aftermath of Richard's outburst was a chaotic blur of mortified faces and frantic whispers. The university chancellor, a stern woman with a surprisingly kind face, quickly stepped to the podium. "There will be order," she commanded, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. Two campus police officers, looking deeply uncomfortable in their starched uniforms, were already moving toward Richard. He puffed out his chest, playing the part of the righteous truth-teller for the audience. Tiffany was tugging frantically at his sleeve, her face a mask of panicked horror, her perfect makeup doing nothing to hide her terror. "I was just trying to get some honesty in here," Richard bellowed as they escorted him, not in handcuffs, but with firm hands on his elbows, away from the front row. The damage was done. My moment, my speech, my tribute to my son. It was all irrevocably tainted, reduced to a shocking, tacky sideshow for campus gossip. I stood frozen at the podium, the index cards containing my carefully chosen words feeling like useless, flimsy paper in my hand. My throat had closed up. The chancellor gave me a sympathetic look and gently announced a brief musical interlude. As a string quartet began to play a painfully cheerful Vivaldi piece, I walked off the stage, my face burning with a shame that wasn't mine. Liam met me at the steps, his own face a storm of confusion and anger. "Mom, I am so sorry," he whispered, wrapping his arms around me. "I can't believe he did that." I just held on to him, burying my face in the unfamiliar, scratchy fabric of his graduation gown, fighting back the hot tears that threatened to fall. I had spent years protecting him from his father's true nature, and in one selfish narcissistic act, Richard had ripped the veil away himself. The rest of the ceremony passed in a surreal haze. I couldn't applaud the other speakers. I couldn't smile for the cameras. I just sat there, a hollowed-out shell, while Richard's words echoed in my head. "Tell them the real cost of success." He had always been an expert at twisting the truth, at framing my pain as his burden. Our reservation that evening was for a celebratory dinner at Uchi, Austin's most acclaimed sushi restaurant. It was meant to be a special night, a toast to Liam's future, but neither of us had the appetite for it. We ended up at a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop on South Congress called Joe's, the celebratory mood replaced by a heavy, somber silence. Liam stirred his iced latte, the clinking of the spoon against the glass the only sound between us for a long time. "He called me," Liam finally said, his gaze fixed on the condensation dripping down his glass. "Dad, he called while you were in the restroom, said he was worried you were going to have some kind of emotional breakdown on stage, that he was trying to protect you from embarrassing yourself." I let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a cough. It was so perfectly, so diabolically Richard. He'd set a fire and was now trying to take credit for calling the fire department. "And do you believe him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Liam finally looked up, his eyes, so much like mine, filled with a new, painful understanding that made him look 5 years older. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I'm 22, Mom, not 12. I saw his face when he did it. He looked happy. He loved it. He loved having everyone look at him." That simple, honest observation from my son broke something open in me that had been sealed shut for years. My primary motivation had been to shield him. I had absorbed every insult, every financial blow, every passive-aggressive jab from Richard and Tiffany, all in the name of a peaceful coexistence for Liam's sake. I had allowed Richard to control the narrative, to paint me as the difficult one, the one who was stuck in the past. I had let him walk all over me, convincing myself it was a form of maternal grace. But seeing the disillusionment in my son's eyes, I realized my silence hadn't been a shield. It had been a cage. It had trapped me in a state of perpetual victimhood, and worse, it had forced my son to live within that lie with me. Richard didn't just feel powerful. He was powerful because I had handed him that power on a silver platter every single day by refusing to fight back. He operated with impunity because he knew I would always choose quiet dignity over messy confrontation. He counted on it. And today, he had counted on it in front of thousands of people. With a resolve I hadn't felt in years, I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet. Tucked into a worn leather flap behind my driver's license was a folded, yellowing piece of paper. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I carried it with me always. It was a talisman of my own foolishness, a constant, tangible reminder of the day I signed away my son's future. I unfolded it carefully on the table between us. It was the promissory note. The ink of Richard's arrogant, looping signature was slightly faded, but the words were clear. $200,000, $200,000, repayment on or before June 1st, 2020. Your grandparents left this for you, Liam, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. Every penny, for your education, for your life, your father, he took it. He took it all, and he never gave it back. And then I told him everything, the whole sordid story, the lies about Nexus Flow, the condescension, the cruelty during the divorce, the performance on the witness stand, the court's casual dismissal of the note. I laid the last 5 years of my silent struggle bare on that small cafe table. Liam picked up the note, his jaw tightening as he read the words. He traced his father's signature with the tip of his finger, his expression hardening from youthful disappointment into a cold, adult fury. This is what he was afraid you'd talk about, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I replied. He wanted to discredit me before I could even open my mouth. He needed everyone to think I was unstable, so if the truth ever came out, nobody would believe it. Something inside me shifted then. It was a tectonic plate of long-suppressed rage grinding against years of quiet sorrow. The humiliation I felt on that stage began to burn away, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. Richard had overplayed his hand. He had underestimated me for the last time. He thought he had won, that he had successfully silenced me and cemented his public image as the long-suffering ex-husband of a hysterical woman. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. The commencement ceremony wasn't the end of the graduation festivities. The next day, the Macomb School of Business was holding a smaller, more intimate awards banquet for its honors graduates. Liam was set to receive the prestigious Rising Star Award, an honor given to only one student in his graduating class. Families were invited, and not only were they invited, but a parent was traditionally asked to say a few words about the recipient. Richard would be there. Of course he would. He wouldn't miss an opportunity to stand in the reflected glory of his son's success. He would be there, smiling, shaking hands, soaking in the praise, the perfect image of a proud father. He would be expecting me to be cowed, to be broken, to stay home and lick my wounds. He was about to be very, very wrong. He wants to know the real cost of success, I said to Liam, my voice dangerously calm, a razor's edge in the quiet coffee shop. Okay, tomorrow, at that banquet, in front of his colleagues and his business contacts, I'm going to give him the bill. The resolve that settled in my heart was as hard and cold as diamond. The fear and humiliation had been cauterized, leaving behind a scar of pure, unadulterated purpose. For the rest of the evening, I was a woman possessed. Back at my small condo, I turned my living room into a war room. The target was Richard, but the ammunition wouldn't be anger or hysterics. It would be cold, hard, documented fact. His greatest fear was not being loved, it was being seen for what he truly was, a fraud. And I was about to stage the most public unmasking of his life. My first move was to exhume the ghost of our divorce. I descended into the crawl space of my closet and pulled out a heavy banker's box labeled Marriage Deceased. The dust puffed up in a fine gray cloud, and I sneezed. It felt like archaeology, digging up the fossilized remains of a life I no longer recognized. Inside were files held together by brittle rubber bands, bank statements, legal correspondence, and a thick folder of emails I had printed out on the advice of my overwhelmed and underpaid divorce attorney. For hours I sifted through the wreckage of my past, but this time I wasn't looking at it with the eyes of a heartbroken wife. I was looking at it with the eyes of a prosecutor building a case. I laid out the evidence on my coffee table, creating a timeline of deceit. I found the emails where Richard had first pitched me the Nexus Flow idea, the ones filled with saccharine phrases like our retirement, for Liam's future, and the damningly specific, I'll pay you back with interest, I swear on my life. I found the string of bounced checks from the first year of the business, small amounts between $500 and $1,000 he'd tried to repay before giving up entirely, each one stamped with a damning red, insufficient funds. I found the condescending messages from after the collapse, the ones where his tone shifted from apologetic to accusatory. You knew the risks, Sarah. Frankly, your constant harping on this is becoming emotionally draining. You need to move on, for Liam's sake. Then I found the crown jewel, a series of texts from just last year. I had made one final, desperate plea for him to start a payment plan, even a small one, as Liam's final tuition bill loomed. His response, which I had saved out of sheer disbelief, was a photo of him and Tiffany on a beach in Bali, raising champagne glasses to the camera. The sun was setting behind them, casting them in a golden, obnoxious glow. It was followed by the text, Sorry, cash flow is a little tight right now. Looks like you'll have to figure it out. I printed the photo on a full sheet of glossy paper. My final piece of evidence was a copy of the judge's ruling from our divorce, the one that declared the note a spousal gift, highlighting the phrase with a yellow marker. It would serve as a perfect illustration of how he had manipulated the system. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the gaslighting, the emotional abuse, the years he'd spent systematically trying to convince me, and everyone else, that I was crazy for wanting what I was owed. The audience at the banquet tomorrow wouldn't just be parents and professors. The Macomb School of Business was a major pipeline into the Austin tech and finance scene, Richard's professional playground. The room would be filled with his peers, his contacts, the very people whose respect he cultivated with such meticulous care. He built his world on a foundation of perceived success and integrity. I was about to detonate a truth bomb right under it. My hands were shaking as I dialed Liam's number. He picked up on the first ring. Mom, are you okay? I'm fine, sweetie, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Better than fine, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Tomorrow, I'm going to do something big. It's going to be messy, and it's going to be very public. Your father will be humiliated, and by extension, you might be too. This is your night, your award. I can't do it if you're not okay with it. I can walk away right now, and we never speak of this again. I held my breath, waiting for his response. This was his day, his celebration. I had no right to hijack it, no matter how justified I felt. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, thinking. He's not the one who stayed up with me all night helping me study for my finance exams, Liam said finally, his voice low and certain. He's not the one who worked 2 jobs to make sure I didn't have to take out a mountain of student loans. He didn't earn this award, Mom. We did. He took a deep breath. Do what you have to do. I'm with you." A wave of love and relief washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. In that moment, he stopped being the boy I needed to protect and became the man who was standing up to protect me. His validation was the final piece of armor I needed. I spent the rest of the night preparing. I didn't write a speech. Speeches could be dismissed as emotional ramblings. Instead, I prepared a statement, a clear, concise, and factual presentation of evidence. I made 5 neat piles of documents, each one a chapter in the story of Richard's fraud. I placed them in a crisp manila folder. I rehearsed my statement in front of the mirror, stripping it of any anger or tears until my voice was as calm and level as a news anchor's. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I would not give him an ounce of emotion to latch onto, to twist into another story about his hysterical ex-wife. I would be calm, I would be factual, and I would be his ruin. When I finally went to bed, as the first hints of dawn were breaking over the Austin skyline, I didn't feel scared or nervous. I felt a profound and terrifying sense of peace. Richard had spent years making me feel powerless, but he had forgotten the one thing my father always taught me. There is no power on earth greater than the truth, spoken plainly and without fear. The AT&T Hotel and Conference Center on the UT campus was a world away from the sprawling, chaotic lawn of the main commencement. The banquet was held in the Tejas Room, a space of understated corporate luxury with floor-to-ceiling windows, heavy cream-colored linens on the tables, and the hushed, clinking sound of expensive silverware. The air was thick with the scent of perfume, success, and catered salmon. It was Richard's natural habitat. I saw him the moment I walked in. He was holding court near the open bar, a glass of bourbon in his hand, laughing with a group of men in bespoke suits. He looked relaxed, confident, completely in his element. He had already spun yesterday's disaster into a compelling narrative in which he was the hero. When he saw me enter, his eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine shock before his mask of charming condescension snapped back into place. He gave me a curt nod, a gesture that said, "You actually dared to show your face?" I ignored him, my heart hammering against my ribs, and went to find Liam at our assigned table. Liam stood up and gave me a tight hug. "You ready?" he whispered. I nodded, clutching the manila folder in my hand like a shield. "Ready." We sat through the dinner, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. I watched Richard work the room, schmoozing with professors, clapping other graduates' fathers on the back, shaking hands with a man I recognized as a prominent venture capitalist named Julian Croft. He was rebuilding his reputation in real time, laying fresh coats of paint over the cracks I had exposed. Tiffany, poured into a tight red dress, clung to his arm, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, her eyes darting around the room, assessing his social victories. They were a team, partners in the grand performance of his life. Every smug smile he flashed, every confident laugh that boomed from his table, was fuel for the fire in my belly. He thought he had weathered the storm. He thought I was a temporary squall that had passed, leaving him damp but unscathed. He had no idea the hurricane was still offshore, and it was about to make landfall directly on top of him. Finally, the dean of the Macomb School, a distinguished man named Dr. Alistair Finch, stepped to the podium to present the final awards. When he called Liam's name for the Rising Star Award, a genuine, unadulterated wave of pride washed away my nerves. My son walked to the stage, shook the dean's hand, and accepted the heavy glass trophy, his face beaming. Dr. Finch then turned back to the microphone. "As is our tradition," he announced warmly, "we invite a parent of the recipient to come share a few words about these incredible young leaders." He gestured toward our table. "Mrs. Vance? Or Mr. Vance?" Richard started to stand up. It was an involuntary, arrogant motion, the assumption that he, of course, would be the one to speak. His face was already forming the words of a gracious, fatherly speech. He was going to claim this moment, this victory, as his own. But Liam, from the stage, spoke into the microphone before his father could take a single step. "I'd like for my mother to speak," he said, his voice clear and steady. He looked directly at me, a silent message passing between us. "It's time." Richard froze, half standing, an expression of pure shock on his face. He slowly sank back into his chair, his face darkening like a thundercloud. All eyes in the room turned to me. I took a deep breath, picked up my folder, and walked to the podium, my heels clicking a steady, determined rhythm on the polished floor. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, felt the weight of Richard's furious glare. I arranged my papers, adjusted the microphone, and looked out, not at the crowd, but directly at my son, who gave me a small, encouraging nod. "Good evening," I began, my voice miraculously calm and even. "I am Sarah Vance, Liam's mother. Dr. Finch, faculty, parents, and graduates, especially my son, Liam. I have never been more proud than I am at this moment. You have all heard so much about success tonight, about ambition and drive and innovation. But I'd like to take a moment to talk about the foundation of success. I'm talking about integrity. I'm talking about keeping your promises." I felt the atmosphere in the room shift. It was no longer the light, celebratory tone of an awards dinner. It was tense, quiet, expectant. Richard was staring at me, his knuckles white where he gripped the table. A great business leader, a great person, is someone whose word is their bond, I continued, my voice never wavering. They honor their debts, both financial and moral. This is the most important lesson I have ever tried to teach my son, a lesson he had to learn in spite of his father, not because of him. A collective gasp went through the room. This was no longer a tribute, it was an indictment. I had their undivided attention. Richard looked like he had been slapped. Tiffany was frantically whispering in his ear, but he wasn't listening. He was locked in a silent battle of wills, with me across the 50 feet that separated us. Liam is here tonight, a recipient of this incredible award, because of a legacy of love left to him by his grandparents. They left him a college fund of $200,000. It was his entire inheritance, his future. 5 years ago, his father, Richard, asked to borrow that money to fund a tech startup called Nexus Flow. I paused, letting the name hang in the air. I saw a flicker of recognition on the face of Julian Croft, the venture capitalist. Richard gave me his word, his sacred promise, that he would pay it back before Liam's first tuition payment was due. I picked up the first document from my folder. It was a copy of the promissory note. "This is the note he signed." I held it up for all to see. "And this," I said, picking up a sheaf of papers, "is a copy of the check for the full amount, clearing from my inheritance account and being deposited into his business account." Richard pushed his chair back and started to rise, his face purple with rage, but Julian Croft, who was sitting at the next table, put a restraining hand on his arm and murmured something. Richard sat back down, trapped and fuming. "Nexus Flow failed," I said, my voice cutting through the suffocating silence. And with it, Richard's promise. For the last 5 years, he has refused to pay back a single cent of the money he took from his own son's future. When I asked him to honor his debt, he called me bitter. He called me hysterical. He told me to move on. I then held up the glossy, full-page printout of the Bali photograph. The image was large and clear enough to be seen from several rows back. The smiling couple, the champagne, the tropical paradise. This was his response last year when I told him I couldn't cover the final tuition bill. He told me, and I quote, "Cash flow is tight." The cost of this single vacation could have paid for Liam's entire final year of college. The room was dead silent. No one was eating. No one was drinking. Every person in that room was staring at Richard, whose face had collapsed. The charming mask was gone, shattered on the floor, leaving only the ugly, naked truth of the man underneath. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly exposed. Tiffany was staring down at her plate, as if hoping the floor would swallow her whole. I looked back at my son, who was watching me with tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. "Yesterday," I said, my voice softening, "Richard tried to stop me from speaking at the commencement. He was afraid of this truth. He was afraid that the carefully constructed image of the successful, benevolent man he pretends to be would be revealed for the fraud it is. He was right to be afraid." I gathered my papers, tapping them neatly into a single pile on the podium. I looked directly at Richard, who finally met my gaze. There was no hatred in his eyes anymore, only a hollow, defeated emptiness. The greatest lesson a parent can give their child is to live in the truth. "Liam, I am so proud of the man you have become, a man of honor, integrity, and character, a man nothing like your father." Then I looked out at the silent, stunned audience. "Congratulations to all the graduates. May your success always be built on a foundation of truth." I turned, walked away from the podium, and returned to my seat without a single backward glance. The silence held for a beat, stretched taut like a wire, and then it was broken. It started with one person, Liam's favorite finance professor, who rose to his feet and began to applaud. Then another person stood, and another. Soon, the entire room, save for the two people at Richard's table, was on its feet, a thundering ovation washing over me. It wasn't for Liam anymore. It was for me. Liam rushed down from the stage and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I love you, Mom," was all he said. Over his shoulder, I watched Richard. He didn't move. He just sat there, frozen in the spotlight of his own public execution, as his colleagues, his friends, and his business contacts stared at him with expressions ranging from pity to utter contempt. He had spent a lifetime selling a lie, and in 5 minutes I had foreclosed on the whole operation. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for him. The next morning, I received a call from a lawyer I didn't know. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice crisp and professional. "My name is Arthur Cole. I'm Julian Croft's personal attorney. He was at the banquet last night, and he'd like to offer you his services pro bono to file a civil suit against Mr. Vance." It turned out my little speech had not only humiliated Richard, it had enraged a man with very deep pockets who despised frauds. The lawsuit we filed was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It didn't even make it to a preliminary hearing. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the public relations nightmare, Richard's lawyer advised him to settle immediately. To pay the full $200,000 plus 5 years of accrued interest, he was forced to sell the oversized house in Westlake he shared with Tiffany and liquidate a significant portion of his stock portfolio. Julian Croft's firm also discovered that Richard's new venture was built on similarly shaky financial ground, and a quiet word from Croft to the other investors was enough to have his second-round funding rescinded. His professional life was over. His personal life crumbled just as quickly. The story of the banquet became the stuff of Austin legend, whispered about at cocktail parties and business lunches. He became a pariah. Tiffany, who had hitched her wagon to a rising star, had no interest in being shackled to a falling one. She left him 6 months later, taking most of what little he had left. One night, about a year after the graduation, my phone rang. It was Richard. He sounded drunk, his voice slurring. He rambled, alternating between begging for forgiveness and blaming me for ruining his life. I listened for a moment to the pathetic, whining voice of the man who had terrorized me for years, and then I calmly said, "I have to go now, Richard," and hung up. A few months after that, Liam and I were having lunch on the sunny patio of a little cafe on Lake Austin. He had started his career at a prestigious downtown firm and was closing on his first condo using the last of the money his grandparents had intended for him. He was happy, confident, and free. My phone buzzed with a text from an old mutual friend. It was a picture of a for sale sign in front of Richard's now empty house. "He's moving to Waco, I think," the text read, "trying to start over." I looked at the picture of the house he had built with my money, the life he had constructed on my silence, and I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. Just a quiet sense of finality. Liam saw me looking at the phone and smiled, raising his glass of iced tea. "You know, Mom," he said, "Dad spent his whole life trying to build an empire." I looked across the table at my son, this wonderful man who was the only thing of real value ever built between us. He had spent years trying to convince the world I was worthless, but in the end, all it took was 5 minutes at a microphone to show everyone his exact price. The end.